Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to the fundamentals of programming. Today we're going to be talking about if, else, and elif statements. Now this is a big one. This is going to allow us to really make some cool programs that are able to react to things and make their own decisions. You know, rather than us having to hard code everything and take a bunch of time to make the decisions for the computer can make decisions on its own. So what can we do with these? If, else, and elif statements allow us to create programs that make decisions. This creates what is known as a flow structure where each potential option represents a branch in that program. So if we were to look at an example of what I'm talking about when I say flow structure, let's say we had a program where we were trying to test to determine what should I eat or drink. So we would start our program, it would ask the question, am I hungry? Then if I am hungry, I will ask myself, is it hot outside? If it is not, I get pho. If it is, I get milkshake. But if I go back to this original question, there's another branch. If I say no, it's going to go to am I thirsty? And then it's going to ask, there's another branch for no and yes and that. So with if, else, and elif statements, we can actually make these branches where we're going in different directions in our program and create an interesting flow so that we can make decisions, and our program has multiple different ways to get to a different output. So we can actually have something different happen each time we run a program rather than just the same. So let's go ahead and look at an example of just using an if statement. So first I just want to introduce if statements. If statements ask whether a condition is true or false and executes a code block if the statement condition is true. Otherwise it's skipped. So when I'm talking about a condition, I'm talking about using comparison or Boolean operators. So if you didn't watch the previous video on Boolean and comparison operators, you probably should do that. They're pretty straightforward. But if you get confused during this video, I highly recommend you do that. So we can ask ourselves questions, basically with this if statement, to see whether it's true or false. And if it's true, we do something. If it's false, we don't. So the basic components of an if statement are made up of the if keyword, a condition, which is just an expression that evaluates to either true or false. It has to evaluate to either true or false. It can't evaluate to other things. A colon to denote that we have a code block coming up, and then an indented code block starting on the line after the colon. Now, it is key that you indent that code block, otherwise it will not work. That indicates to Python, the Python compiler, that it is a code block, so it will be executed. And again, a code block, all it is, a code block is just a piece of code that will run if the condition is true. So it's just a piece of code. So let's go to Replit and take a look at an example here. So you should be in your compiler right now, and let's go ahead and make a simple if statement here. So if, and let's say we were continuing with that example last week where we were trying to determine if somebody could ride a ride or not based off their height or weight or age. So the first thing we need to probably ask is their height, and let's say that it's a Six Flag ride, so they need to be taller than 48 inches. So we would say that first we need the if keyword, then we need something to we need to create our comparison here. This is where last week's video comes in handy, and we can say less than, or actually we'll do greater than or equal to 48. And then a colon, don't forget the colon, and then this automatically tabs, but you need to make sure that this is an indented code block. So again, all this is going to do is if this statement right here is true, if height is greater than or equal to 48, it will do this. And I'm going to say print tall enough to ride. Oops, not tied, ride. Now, it's not going to work right now because I haven't declared what the height is, but let's declare that. So let's say height equals 72. I hit run, and it prints out tall enough to ride because 72 is greater than or equal to 48. So it will print that out. If I'm shorter, though, it's going to print out nothing. And that's a problem, and we'll talk about what you can do to make it so that it actually prints something out if this statement is false. But first, let's go ahead and look at a little flowchart and a breakdown of what this program is actually doing. Alright, so here's a little diagram I made. It just breaks down what we just did. So it says, here's the if keyword, a condition right here, the colon, and the code block. And that's also called the if clause in a lot of places. So if you hear the word if clause, all that is the code block that runs if the condition is true. So if we look at the flowchart, it's very simple. We start our program. It checks whether the size is greater than or equal to 48. If it is true, it prints tall enough to ride. If it is false, it ends. So what if it's false and we want something to happen, right? What if we wanted to print, sorry, too short, you should come back next year or something like that? So we could go ahead and go to the next thing we can talk about, which is else statements. Now, else statements will be executed if the if statement is false. So this is exactly what we need in this case. And else statements are pretty straightforward. The else statements does not have a condition and is just made up of the else keyword, a colon, and an indented code block. So it's pretty straightforward. And let's go ahead and add that to our code now. So let's go back to our little replicator here, our little code, and let's say, here's the else keyword, else, and I need the colon, print, too short to ride, frowny face. So now if I hit run, it's going to print too short to ride, frowny face. If I change it back to 72, it'll still print tall enough to ride. So this else statement right here only runs if this condition is false, which is very useful. So this is an if-else statement. This is like one of the most fundamental things in programming. But let's go ahead and go back and look at a flow diagram of this. So if we go back to the little slideshow here, we can look at this right here. So now I didn't put the frowny face in my diagram here, but so you start the program, it checks whether the size is greater than or equal to 48. If it is true, you print tall enough to ride just like before, but now we have something in this false branch here. So this is, again, this is the true branch, this is the false branch. In this false branch, we added an else statement that's going to say print too short to ride, and this is called our else branch. So this is, again, these flow charts or flow diagrams are extremely useful for troubleshooting your program to kind of see where the logic is flowing and where your program flows. So I use these pretty often, and they're really good at showing you what your program is actually doing. Now, how are we going to ask more questions than just, how tall they are? Let's see if with that we need to actually use what are called elif statements. Now, an elif statement allows us to test multiple conditions. Or in other words, we can ask multiple questions while running our program. So all an elif statement really is it requires the same exact inputs or syntax as an if statement. So we need the elif keyword. That's the only difference. Then we need a condition that evaluates a true or false, a colon, and an indented code block, just like an if statement. So let's go ahead and go back to our program here. Now let's say that we also had age. Let's say the age is 14, and let's say we had a weight, which is 220 pounds. So this is a big 14-year-old apparently. So what we can do is we can place the elif statements in between the if and the else statements. So we say elif, which is the elif, that's the keyword. Basically we're asking another question. If, let's say, age is greater than 14, actually we'll say greater than or equal to 14, print old enough to ride. Elif, and then let's do another statement, and let's do weight. Let's say weight is less than 280 pounds, print you don't weigh too much. I don't. There is weight limits on rides, unfortunately. So, now if we run this program, let's see what happens. So it says, tall enough to ride. Well, how do I know if I'm old enough to ride or I don't weigh too much? So, with this, we should probably think about restructuring our program, because what's going to happen here is it's going to go to the first true if or elif statement. So in this case, it's tall enough to ride. So it's going to evaluate this, and it's going to end. So what we should do instead is reverse this and say less than or equal to, change it, and change these to sorry, too short, frowny face. So we're changing the overall structure of our program so that if these are all false, then we know that we can ride the ride. So our else statement should run if everything works. So we'll say enjoy your ride in our else statement. And for these elifs, we need to change these all to less than or equal to, or less than, and less than 180, or greater than 180 in this case. So now we need to change these as well. Too young. Try again next year. Weights, we'll change it so it prints out sorry. Too heavy. I don't don't know how to phrase that properly. I feel bad. So now if we run the program, it says too young, try again next year. And that's because our age is not less than or equal to 14. So we would be too young. If we change this to 15, now it says enjoy your ride, because this is false. We are greater than 48. We are older than 14. And we weigh less than 280. So it would go to this final else statement. So that's kind of weird. And again, this is why I would like to go back to the control flow diagram. So let's go ahead and do that. So if we look at this, here's our code right here. It says if size is less than 48, and I change this. This should say 14. Elif age is less than 5. Weight is greater than 280. We can see that this is basically our code. So now the program's going to start. It's going to check if the size is less than 48. If it is false, it goes to the next condition to check, this Elif statement. It checks whether the age is less than 5 or 14 was our case. If that is false, it goes to the next Elif statement. It checks whether weight is greater than 280. And if that is false, we finally get to this else statement, which says print enjoy your ride. Now, if any of these statements right here, size, age, or weight, were true, we are going to print this code block and then end the program. So that's why we needed to change the overall structure of our program, because the first statement that is true will end our program. It will end this little structure right here. So notice that it goes true, it prints too short to ride, and we end our program. So we need to make sure we're structuring our program properly so that we get the result we want. So we actually had to change the questions and change the comparison operators to get the result that we wanted, where it would say print enjoy your ride if these were all false instead of true. We were doing true-based tests earlier. Now we did change it to false, so that if everything is false, then we get what we want. If any of the values are true, we know that something is not quite right. So that's really powerful, and that's if, elif, and else statements all together. So really cool, guys, and I hope you your imaginations are just exploding with all the different things that you can do. So let's go ahead and summarize what we talked about today. So if statements allow us the program to make decisions based on the data given. So again, we're checking conditions using like comparison operators, like when we were checking the age or the height or the weight of a rider and testing to see whether or not they can ride on the ride. And that gives us a lot of flexibility. We can also use the elif statements to ask multiple questions within the same thing and same flow structure, so we can create branches in our program. Like if we went back here, let's go back. These are all different branches in the program. For each true, we have a different branch. For each false, we have also another branch. So as you can tell, there are 3 branches in our program here for each of the 3 conditions that we talked about. So that's, again, something that's really useful with making these flow diagrams is you can really break down the overall structure of your program and understand it more in depth. So, and that brings me to my last point, is that flow diagrams allow us to visualize our programs and troubleshoot errors. If you are not getting the results you want with if, else, and elif statements, you should probably make a flow diagram and kind of diagram things out and see what's going on. I highly recommend you do that even before you start programming. It's just a great way to kind of brainstorm and get your idea out there. I generally pretty much do that every time because I like to draw, it's artistic, and it's also a good way to get my ideas out there and make sure I don't make any silly mistakes right off the bat. So, go ahead and start using those statements, and happy programming.